Good morning, my dear friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're going to be learning chapter 21 in the laws of Shabbat in the Rambam. Over here, the Rambam will be discussing various stringencies that the Rabbis have put in regards to the many different laws of Shabbat. We have, as we know, there are 39 principal laws, which we've learned about quite in detail, going through them of what we are and what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. But then there are various things that are similar to these, or that they might bring us to do one of these principal laws, which is a problem on Shabbat. So therefore, the rabbis have put in certain stringencies and in order to make sure that we shouldn't come to do any of the forbidden activities on Shabbat, and God forbid come to desecrate the Shabbat. So, it says in the Torah, it says that on Shabbos, you should cease from activity, you should stop working, and therefore this will include also things that are similar to things that are forbidden. The rabbi said, don't do them in case you don't come to actually do real work. So let's get involved. It's a little bit of a long chapter, but quite fascinating, going through certain things which at first glance might seem like, what's the problem with doing this on Shabbat? But the rabbis say, look at this detail. This might bring you to do something else which is not allowed. On Shabbat, we're not allowed to level crevices like a hole or a little mound. We're not allowed to level on Shabbat, because we're not allowed to plow on Shabbat. That's one of the 39 capital laws of Shabbat. So therefore, a person should not go to the bathroom in a field that has been plowed, because maybe he will come to level the ground. Or, for instance, a person who is emptying a storeroom. That person has a garage with an unpaved floor, and now they are cleaning it out. They shouldn't do it all the way, because they might come to the end, and then they'll notice that there are some cracks, there's some problem in the floor, in the walls, and they might fix it. Because it's a storeroom, it's not somewhere where you're usually going, and now that you're clearing it out, you'll maybe suddenly find some problems, and you'll start working on fixing it. So, you are allowed, if it's for a mitzvah, you're allowed to empty it you're allowed to empty most of it, but don't do it all the way till the end, so that you won't come to start fixing any problems with the structure. So, how about people who play with, he says over here, with nuts or almonds, where you throw them on the ground like marbles. So those is a problem to play it on an unpaved ground, because you might have a little mound, a little extra earth, and you'll want to move it away so that the ball can go, so to speak. So that the marble or this little nut that you're playing with will fly across properly, and that is not allowed to be done on Shabbat. We're not allowed to make the earth flat. So therefore, we're only allowed to play this on a paved ground. It's good to know for Shabbat. And even a floor which is paved, we shouldn't oil it down, and we don't wash the floor on Shabbat, because all of this is part of the concept of not leveling ground on Shabbat, which is something which we're not allowed to do. So all these different things we're really involved with the floor, even though it is a paved floor, still this is something which we should withhold ourselves from doing. A person who waters any plants on Shabbat, that's something which we're not allowed to do. So that's generally speaking, we're not allowed to sow on Shabbat, we're not allowed to work with the field. So the Rambam says that it is forbidden to draw water from the well, which was the way they did it back in the day, from a cistern using a pulley. So if someone is using a pulley to pull out the water, if it's in an open area where it would be easy to come and pull the water which you need for yourself, but you might also just take some extra water to water around you where there is the grass or the field which is growing, that's something which you shouldn't do on Shabbat. So therefore you shouldn't pull with a pulley, which is evidently, it seems that it's much easier to pull that way, and you might just come to pull a little bit extra water for planting. But if it's in your courtyard, so over there it's just in your house, and it's obviously you're pulling the water for drinking purposes, not for working in the field, so then that would not be a problem. A person is not allowed to detach on Shabbat. So if you have a tree that has a live branch, we're not allowed to detach the branch on it. Or if you have plants that are growing, you're not allowed to come and pull the fruit off it. So therefore, the Rambam says a very interesting outcome of this would be that the rabbi said that we're not allowed to remove honey from a beehive on Shabbat because this resembles the detaching of the produce from its source. Same concept. You have the source, you have the beehive, and then you have in the honeycomb, and then you want to open it and let the honey come out. That would not be allowed. But if the beehive was already opened and the honey is dripping out, so then that's fine if you've done that before Shabbat. But on Shabbat, you shouldn't do it. On that same note, if you have fruits that fall from a tree on Shabbat, we should not eat those fruits on Shabbat. We should wait till Shabbat is over and then only eat them. Because the same concept, if we say that you're allowed to eat from fruits that have fallen off the tree on Shabbat, you might come to pick some more fruits and eat them on Shabbat. And that will be not good because we're not allowed to pick fruit from a tree on Shabbat. But if we're talking about just the smell, if you have a plant that smells good, so you're allowed to smell it on Shabbat while it's connected to the tree. You're obviously not allowed to detach it, but while it's attached, you're allowed to come and smell a flower or something like that. But if it's a fruit that smells good, so then don't, because you might come to take the fruit to eat it. All right. We are not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbat. Why? For the same concept. We are worried that a person who is riding the animal will see a branch, a low-hanging branch, and will rip it off to use it to lead and guide the animal. So therefore, we say, don't ride animals on Shabbat because you might come to do that, which evidently seems to have been quite a practice, that you're riding down the street and you suddenly see a branch and you rip it off and you use it to guide the animal. That's something which you should not do on Shabbat. But if, for instance, if you have an animal which is full of lots of heavy weight and it's falling, well then of course you're allowed to help the animal because the animal is in pain and you should help the animal out. Doesn't mean that you should ride it, but it means that you should help out the animal to take off the heavy weights of which it has, all this, the things that it's carrying, the big load on Shabbat. But when you take off the load, don't do it in the regular way, because we shouldn't be doing this in the regular way. This is part of our work during the week. So we should do this in a different way, in a abnormal way. So for instance, if you, instead of just taking it off with your hands, maybe push it off with your head. That's the option that the Rambam gives. But any way that is abnormal, that is different than regular, just in order to show that it's Shabbat and we're not here to be working with the animal on Shabbat, but rather we're just here to make the animal not to be in pain. Similarly, if you have your animal that you're bringing to your, full of stuff that you're just been traveling and you come to your place where you're staying, to your house before Shabbat, and right now Shabbat begins and your stuff is still on the animal, but Shabbat has now begun. What should you do? You have to take off your stuff. So the Rambam says that if you can just, cut the strings and let the bags fall, so then that's good. But undo not the cut, but rather undo the knots and let the strings fall. Let the packages fall to the ground. That's good. But if it was glassware or so on, then you can put like pillows under it, just to let it fall, so that it shouldn't be resembling to the regular way that we do it throughout the week. We are not allowed to press fruits together until they become like a single entity, like to take two fruits and make them into one. Because this is similar to collecting food on Shabbat, which in a field we're not allowed to collect sheaves of, grains and so on and so forth. So therefore, if a person has in their garden, some apples or fruits that have fallen and are spread out, they shouldn't collect them into one bowl or bag on Shabbat in the same way that they do throughout the week, because that is something which we shouldn't do, because maybe you'll press down on the fruits and they'll become one entity. So that's something which we shouldn't do. A person is not allowed to extract food. Extract food if you have, let's say, we're not allowed to thresh on Shabbat. So if we have grains that are inside their shell, we're not allowed to extract the grain from inside the shell. So same concept, we're not allowed to squeeze olives or grapes, because we are going to be extracting the juice or the oil and so on and so forth from within the fruit. That's in regards to olives and grapes, which are meant to be squeezed. But what about strawberries or maybe pomegranates? So those we shouldn't do that, because it is similar to the action of what we do for grapes and olives, which is not allowed to be done on Shabbat. Even though generally speaking, pomegranates are meant to be eaten, although there is pomegranate fruit juice, but the usual way to eat is usually meant to be eaten, but still you shouldn't squeeze them. Apples, although you can make apple juice, but by just squeezing an apple with your hand is not really going to do anything. So that's not really a problem. In regards to squeezing, let's say you're eating a pickle. Now a pickle is full of juice. So are you allowed to squeeze that pickle? It's a lot of juice in it. So it depends. If you want to extract the juice because you want the juice, then that's a problem. But if it's just, to soften the food or something like that, so then that would be okay. Juice that has been extracted, even on its own, that flows out of a fruit on Shabbat. So let's say you have, in regards to olives and grapes, so those are the primary fruits that we're not allowed to squeeze on Shabbat. If they are so juicy, very juicy olives or juicy grapes, and there is liquid that is seeping out of it, just on its own, we're still not allowed to drink those on Shabbat, that liquid. But if we're talking about pomegranates, which are not usually meant for that, for squeezing, if it comes out on its own, you're allowed to. Unless you, in the first place, bought them in order to squeeze them, so then that would be different. But if you squeezed it before Shabbat, and now it just continues on Shabbat to come out more liquid, those you're allowed to drink, because you've already squeezed it before Shabbat. So we're not worried that you're going to squeeze them anymore on Shabbat. All right. A person is not allowed to grind on Shabbat. So therefore, if a person is making an Israeli salad, these Israeli salads, where they're really, really cut very small, we have to be careful not to make it too small. Because if we make it too small, it's going to be as if we have ground the vegetables. So therefore, we have to be very careful not to grind our foods on Shabbat. And on that same note, we're not allowed to grind, let's say, pepper, black pepper. You have these freshly ground peppers, black pepper. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbat, because you're actually grinding the food, which is something which we're not allowed to do. Now, the Rambam will now go into a little segment over here of a few laws, where on the note of grinding, at least back in the day, there still is many natural forms of healing, which you use various plants and so on and so forth, which you grind up and you eat them or you drink them in order to become healthier. So the Rambam says, if we're talking about a healthy person, we should be careful and not take these herbs and medications on Shabbat, because we might come to grind on Shabbat, which is something which we're not allowed to do. In other words, like this. To take certain herbs, to grind them up, and to eat them or to drink them on Shabbat is something which we're not allowed to do if we're not sick. If a person is sick, it's a different story. But if a person who is healthy, and he's just taking it to strengthen their immune system, or just to prevent sickness, so on and so forth, they are not allowed to do this on Shabbat. Because on Shabbat, we are not allowed to grind. And that is a capital law of Shabbat. It's one of the primary 39 laws. If we will say that you're allowed to take these medications, these things, these, various plants and herbs, which are in the vein of medicine, we might come to actually grind them on Shabbat, and we don't want a person to do that. So this is in regards to eating or drinking a certain ointment. But in regards to oil, where a person would anoint it on themselves on Shabbat. So one second. If it's an oil that all people do, it's just for everyone, it's good, it strengthens your skin, so then that would be allowed to do it. But if it's meant for people who are unhealthy, but you are healthy, so then you shouldn't do that on Shabbat. Because again, it's the same as medication, which we should be careful in regards to medication. Because medication becomes a little bit of a gray area. And that's why the Rambam talks about it a little bit. And he says, if a person is sick, well, then they need to have their medication. You don't want them to die, God forbid. But if a person is healthy and is taking medication, well, they don't really need it. And they might come to do something which is not allowed. So therefore, we have to be careful. So for instance, if a person who feels some discomfort in their teeth, right? So you have a little bit of pain in your tooth. One of the ways to help, it seems, is to take some vinegar, sip some vinegar, and then spit it out. So this, the Rambam says, you should not do. But what you're allowed to do is sip it and then swallow it. So if you're drinking it, so then that's one thing. But to do it in a more of a medical way, so then you should be careful. And you should not do it. Same idea. Person who has a sore throat. So there was a way that a person should gargle oil, olive oil in their mouth. Actually, it just says oil. And then spit it out. And this would help with their sore throat. So again, this is something which you shouldn't do. It's not like the person is very, very sick. You have a little bit of a sore throat. What should you do? Drink the oil. If you became healthy, you became healthy. But it's not that you are doing a medical action over here for someone who is not really very sick. Yeah, a little bit of a tooth pain, a little bit of a sore throat, but it's not like this is anything life-threatening. So, in that same vein of medicine, if a person who has a small wound on Shabbat, a person shouldn't put hot water mixed with oil onto that wound on Shabbat, because this is, combining things and making a medicine on Shabbat for their wound. Or to put it onto to put it on a piece of fabric, like on a gauze, and to put the oil and water onto the gauze and put it on, because we have another problem. At that point, you might be squeezing, which squeezing is not allowed on Shabbat. So it gets complicated, that's for sure. The laws of Shabbat are very complicated. So we're trying to figure out what is allowed and what is not allowed to do. And there are many, many details over here. So we're doing our best to understand what's going on. Now the Rambam goes on to a little bit of a different style, and he says a person cannot wash themselves in water. It's a type of water that has evidently some chemicals which make you to have diarrhea, because that is something which is not very pleasant on Shabbat, and on Shabbat you're supposed to have delight and not discomfort. On that same note, the person is not allowed to make themselves vomit on Shabbat. For instance, in what case? By taking certain drugs or, certain foods which will make you to throw up. That's something which you're not allowed to do. But if you stick your fingers into your throat, then you are allowed. Okay. How about moving on to a different topic? Feeding your animals on Shabbat. So a person should not feed their animals in the same way that they do it throughout the week. Because as we said earlier, we might grind the food up for them. So therefore we have to be careful when we do it. So we have to do it in a different way than how we regularly do it throughout the week. And this is all in regards to animals that are yours and you're taking care of them. But if it's just birds who come into your garden, or other animals that are coming into your property, but they don't belong to you and you don't have any responsibility to feed them, so then you shouldn't do that on Shabbat. Although you're probably allowed, I don't think he says it particularly here, but you're probably allowed to just put out some food and then the animals might come to eat it. That's probably not a problem. But to specifically come and feed animals that are not yours, even in a abnormal way, is a problem. So that is the chapter of today. So it's a little bit of a longer chapter, but it's discussing the various stringencies that the rabbis have put in place so that we should not come to do the actual work which we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And this is also very important. So although they are not the biblical laws, they are laws that were added on by the rabbis in order to make sure that we should not come to desecrate Shabbat. So on that note, we will complete for today, and hope you enjoyed, hope you understood everything. I know there's a lot of details. If you want, look in the original text, but have a very good one, and we will see you.